That would be nice. Let me pull up the slide. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
That's kind of like on Friday. I've been out doing like oh, I thought I know pretty well. That is a story.
Vent, air, or whatever you need to do. Thank you, Michael. Seeing none, we'll move on to our action items. This time, we're going to be amending the Transportation Improvement Program. I'm going to introduce Anna for your input and guidance.
Awesome, thank you. Good morning, everyone. In your meeting packet, you will find the second cycle of amendments to the TIP that we have presented to you in fiscal year 2023. This time, the proposed amendments are going to be modifying the new fiscal year 2023 to 2026 TIP that was adopted by this body in November and is currently awaiting approval of the statewide STIP. Once GNRC receives notification that FHWA and FTA have approved the statewide STIP that TDOT submitted last week, GNRC will be able to submit any adopted amendments for approval. So just wanted to make sure we had a good understanding of which TIP we were speaking of. There are 5 amendments to the TIP proposed today. All told, these amendments would add nearly $15.7 million federal and state dollars to existing projects in the TIP and propose to program $2.2 million state dollars to new projects in this TIP. The first amendment for consideration is requested by the City of Lebanon, and it's for their Cedar City Pedestrian Improvements Project. This is a project that Lebanon received a TAP award from TDOT last year, in last year's award cycle. At that time, they had only received a partial award, and TDOT is coming back at this point and adding additional TAP funds for construction to this project in order to bring the project total up to the full dollar amount needed for construction. Following that, we have a request from TDOT for the Hartsville Pike widening from north of Lovers Lane to State Route 26, also US 70. TDOT is adding STBG funds to this project from the statewide STBG pot. They recently received an estimate for the project that was higher than was originally estimated for the project, so they're increasing that construction amount. Following that, we have a request from Williamson County for their Hillsborough Road at Old Hillsborough Road realignment and signalization project. GNRC is granting HIP funds to this project. This is suballocated HIP funds that were suballocated to the region. The goal is to assist with covering anticipated increased construction costs for this project. Just a reminder that we had passed a resolution for this specific funding type and designated these funds to be used for cost overruns for projects that needed additional money in the right-of-way and construction phases. So we received a request for this addition and we're able to provide that to this project. Following that, we have 2 projects that are being added to the TIP for Eagleville and Mount Pleasant. These projects, I'm sorry to throw you off there, Daniel, doing 2 at once. These projects were awarded in the 2022 award year cycle by TDOT from their multimodal access grant call for projects. TDOT made about $26.6 million in awards across the state this year under that program, and these are the two projects in our planning area that received awards. The first being Eagleville's downtown revitalization project, segments 1 and 2. We're adding that project to the TIP with all state funds. And then following that, Mount Pleasant's project is their North Main Street Sidewalk project, Phase 1. Also adding this project to the TIP with all state funds. And that is all 5 amendments that I have for you guys today. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Okay, any questions for Anna?
Highway Infrastructure Program funds, we received 4 years worth of allocations of funding under that program starting in 2018. It was kind of an ascending amount of funding over the course of those years. We've handed out funding to projects that needed additional when they were experiencing cost overruns. We have about $800,000 remaining in that pot of money after we provide this portion to Williamson County. So again, that money is available on a first come, first served basis for cost overruns for right-of-way and construction. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else got any questions for Anna? If not, we'll invite the public back in for discussion. Does anyone here from the public like to comment on these amendments? Seeing none, we'll come back to the board. I need a motion for Resolution 2305, approving amendments. Okay, I got a motion. Is that you, Eddie? Got a motion by Hood, second by Commissioner Rogers Anderson. All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? So moved. Okay, for next item, I'm going to turn it over to Sean, Transportation Planning Manager. Sean?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. For our second action item, we're seeking revisions to the federal functional classification map at a request from the City of Franklin. Main purpose of the federal functional classification system is to provide a framework for identifying the primary role of roadways across the region and supporting state, regional, local travel. And it informs the design of roadway improvements and determines eligibility for federal funding. The map that you see on the right is the functional classification for our region. You can see a little bit hard, a lot of colors I know, but interstates are in blue, state routes are indicated in red, and then all the way down to major and minor collectors in purple, minor collectors in yellow, and then the local roadways is the remaining roadways across the region indicated in gray. And I guess one way to think about the functional classification, if you go to the next slide, here's two visuals that we have. The one on the left kind of indicates how local roads feed into collector roads that feed into arterial roads across the system. And then on the right, you'll see kind of the local roadways are place a much greater emphasis on access, and so those tend to be roads that are slower in speed and have more access points, whether it be driveways or intersections. And then those arterials are more focused on mobility, so you think of the interstates and some of the limited access highways across this region, like 386, where there are fewer access points and higher speeds. So if we go to the next slide, just a couple of examples across the region. Obviously, interstates, you know pretty well. Other freeway or expressways, such as 386 in Sumner County. Other principal arterials include a lot of the state routes or pikes across the region, as well as McHatcher and Franklin. Some of the minor arterials, I think an example of that would be White Bridge Pike in Metro Nashville. And then major collectors, example would be Stewart's Ferry Pike in Wilson County. Minor collector, an example would be Otter Creek Road in Oak Hill. And then, as I mentioned, the other classification would be all the other roads. These are roads in like subdivisions across the region that would kind of capture the remaining classification. And so the requested change that we have that we're presenting to you today it involves a request for the City of Franklin. Included in your packet is a change to the classification of a couple of roads, including McEwen Drive, Liberty Pike, and Oxford Glen Drive. The main driver in these changes is changing McEwen Drive between Cool Springs Boulevard and Oxford Glen to Wilson Pike. Currently, that roadway is designated as a local road. It doesn't function that way, and there is a project plan to widen McEwen Drive from Cool Springs Boulevard to Wilson Pike, and local roads are not eligible, and so this would not only indicate how this roadway currently functions, but also to allow it to proceed and to be federal aid eligible and utilize construction funding that is currently programmed in the TIP for the project. Associated with those changes are some changes to Liberty Pike and Oxford Glen Drive, changing the classification of Liberty Pike east of Oxford Glen Drive to Waverly Place from a minor arterial to a major collector, and then also changing Oxford Glen Drive from McEwen Drive to Clovercroft from a minor arterial to a major collector, and then lastly changing Oxford Glen Drive from Clovercroft down to Murfreesboro Pike or Murfreesboro Road, State Route 96, from a minor arterial to a minor collector. And so this process does require not only endorsement by the Transportation Policy Board, but this is followed by a review and approval by Tennessee Department of Transportation, as well as a concurrence by FHWA. So we're requesting your endorsement of these changes through the adoption of the resolution.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Any questions for Sean? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to Resolution 2306 for approving changes to the federal functional classification map. Got a motion, Mayor Moore, and you want to comment? Let me get a second.
After a second,
Yeah, okay, I need a second. Got a second by Mayor Reed. Okay, Mayor Moore.
This road really needs reclassifying. We're fully funded on this road, is my understanding, and they've completed right-of-way acquisition and drawn down some of the money. But since it's classified as a local road is a problem, but it doesn't function as a local road. So changing the classification is very important so we can continue to move forward with that project.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. Anyone else? Okay, I'll just take it as a question being called. If you're for this motion to approve these changes, vote aye. Anyone opposed? So moved. We'll move to item C, 2307, endorsing additional to Strategic Highway Network. And I guess I'm back to you again, Sean.
Thank you. So the second, or the last action item is seeking endorsement of an addition to the Strategic Highway Network. This is not a very common ask of the Transportation Policy Board, but we did receive a request from the Department of Defense for the addition of this facility to the Strategic Highway Network based on a recent study that they had conducted to identify preferred routes linking the most vital military installations with respective seaports and airports across the region, and so, or across the nation, sorry. And so kind of what to know is that the Strategic Highway Network, or abbreviated as STRAWNet, is critical to domestic operations for the Department of Defense, necessary for kind of mobilizing both in peacetime and wartime the movement of vehicles, heavy armor, and other items to support military operations. And If we go to the map of on the next slide of the straw net in the state of Tennessee, you'll see that it's primarily focused on interstates across our region or our state, and the proposed addition would be adding Briley Parkway from I-65 to I-40 on the east side. And as I had mentioned, this is a recommendation that came out of the recent study from the Department of Defense. And so this process involves the Department of Defense coordinating with TDOT on this effort to designate the facility. And what we are asking for today is an endorsement of an addition of this facility to the strategic highway network.
Any questions for Sean? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adopt 2307. Got a motion by Mayor Callis. Got a second. All in favor? Anybody discussion on that? All in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? So moved. We'll move to item 4, to our information items, and this is transportation plan for Davidson and Sumner counties, and I'm going to turn it back to Sean again.
All right, so our current regional transportation plan, Middle Tennessee Connected, we adopted in February 2021. It identifies more than $10.5 billion for investments throughout the region out to 2045. And there are several regionally significant projects within the document. One is the modernization of the inner loop, downtown interstate loop, surrounding Nashville, and then also the Northeast Transportation Corridor, also known as the NET Corridor, to modernize and upgrade that corridor as well. And there's 2 proposed amendments or projects that would impact these regionally significant projects that you've recently heard about. One is the Cleveland Street extension, which is a new project that NDOT and TDOT are looking to implement, that would connect the River North development, where the Oracle site is located, with Dickerson Pike on the eastern portion. And so the connections would include 2 different pieces. One is a Cleveland Street extension, and on the northern in blue, as well as on the southern side, a bike ped connection underneath Interstate 24. And so kind of the key issues with this project, and I'm going to turn it over to Diana in a moment here to give you a little bit more detail about this project, is the project needs to be added to the regional transportation plan in order to move forward. And kind of some of the key issues is, given that this project is in the downtown inner loop and it will interact with the interstate, is trying to get a little bit more information and have you all informed about how this project interfaces with the downtown interstate loop, given that anything that happens with this project may influence future projects and opportunities to improve the downtown interstate loop, and then to what extent federal funds would be required to support the implementation of this project. And so I'll turn it over to Diana, who has a couple of more detailed slides on the project.
Just 1 second. Perfect, thank you. I'm so glad you're doing this, because I am really not good at this. All right. Thank y'all very much. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to bring back before y'all the initiative of the Cleveland Street extension. There's actually 2 parts to this. It's actually the Cleveland Street extension as well as Grace Street, so we'll go through both of that with y'all today. So just a little bit, I'm going hone in on the Cleveland extension for you. This is for multimodal service. We are looking to include sidewalk, bikeways as well. But the main purpose behind this is actually, as it was mentioned by Sean, is a multimodal connection for potential BRT that will connect from Dickerson, where we're seeing a great increase in our ridership overall. So we're looking to have that connection go through. It'll connect through East Bank as we build that out, and then over to Sobro, which is another mobility center. Steve and I go back and forth between whether we call them transit centers or mobility centers. I like to call them mobility centers because I would like to see other modes in there than just a bus. But it'll also connect to our Sobro, which is on the southern part of our downtown area. So this is kind of giving you a good map and identifying where the Cleveland extension will happen. And then I'll also there's another map that kind of shows you Gray Street, which is mainly just a ped and a pedestrian and bicycle access only. That's going to be built, that is part of this conversation. So as I'd mentioned, this is a regional transit connection. Again, we're looking to make that connection to our current Dickerson Pike that'll connect down through the East Bank projects, which we had the opportunity to share with y'all last year, an update on where we're at with that. As you can see from this map, it is allowing us to look at going north-south. We're actually identifying additional mobility centers on the East Bank as well as our Sobro, which gives us access that connects down to Murfreesboro. And again, this is looking at a multimodal aspect of it and adding an opportunity for a potential BRT that would be connecting from Dickerson down through East Bank and going through. And that connection of Cleveland Extension is very essential for us to be able to build this BRT connection. All right, so how did we get to this point? Just want to give a little bit of background information. This conversation all started when Oracle actually said they're coming to our town, so we had to develop a partnership. So one of the essential things that even Oracle recognized, because they are bringing multiple jobs, as you can see from this, by 2031, they're guaranteeing 8,500 new full-time positions. So this is a big economic development piece for Metro Nashville, Davidson County. So there was a resolution that was actually passed last year, not last year, the year before, excuse me, which actually speaks to the 1.2 million square feet of office space with parking, retail, and other improvements, including, I think they're believing, and correct me, I have Ben York, who's on my staff here, they're including some residential as well, correct? I just wanted to make sure some residential. And in that, they agreed to $175 million worth of infrastructure improvement, and that's what they're currently doing right now. They have started their infrastructure improvements, and that's part of our River North UDO that we have set up. So that the infrastructure is the water, the sewer. They're building a pedestrian bridge that will actually go over the Cumberland River and connect into Germantown, so we're super excited about that. And then also some of the infrastructure includes roadway network improvements as well. Again, starting that multimodal aspect of it. So Metro Nashville in this resolution actually partnered because this is actually driving through an economic development aspect. And so what the partnership said is, and this is also something that was an ask of Oracle. You know, they felt very important. They're also looking at it from a multimodal perspective as well. They want to encourage their employees to walk, to bike, or to use transit. So we're really excited about them moving forward. So the resolution under that economic development theme in partnership said $40 million would come in through the economic development funding that was actually moved over to the general fund. We would get $40 million from TDOT, and then we would actually put in 6.198, let's call it $6.2 million as part of the partnership. And this, again, is all part, and this is kind of where we've taken this one initial step, and we started and came up with Imagine East Bank, which we shared out with y'all last year. And so it's starting to build out this infrastructure network that we're moving on. So we have design options that I'm going to share with y'all today. So this is our current design option to go under I-24. This is, right now, we are currently looking at it and evaluating the construction costs, the right-of-way costs, the utility impacts, the time frame, maintenance, everything. We're going through this process right now in the design and having this very in-depth conversation with TDOT about it. There is also an over-design which is right here. And I know it says under, and I apologize for that, but this is actually our over design. We caught that typo early this morning, but it was too late, so sorry about that, Michael. But then again, this is something that they just gave to us, so now we're going through the evaluation process. So we do have both a current design for under and over. And part of that is looking at what is the impact, what are the potential impacts, and we just aren't there yet. So I am looking forward to coming back to y'all in the future, keeping you up to date as we move through this project, and continue to share out some of the initiatives that we're taking as we build out the River North and the future East Bank. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Diana or Sean? Okay, thank you.
Well, great job explaining it. I was one of the grippers
That's okay,
earlier
sir.
in the process because I think it was pretty understood on my part at least, and thanks for the update and a lot of information. I think my question really goes back to, as we move forward, our funding is limited, and so what is going to be the demand on these other funds that we're all wanting moving forward? Do we have any projection on that? I think it's a great economic development project. It's exciting, and I can see how it may have some help as far as traffic congestion. And it's exciting to have Oracle coming because we're all going to benefit.
Yes, sir. So we do feel, I can and cannot answer, but I can share. We do feel that this is going to provide congestion relief on the interstate. A lot of local trips today actually happen on the interstate, and we do feel with building this connection of the Cleveland extension connecting Dickerson and then also building out the spine and the East Bank, we're going to be able to remove some of those local trips off the interstate, so we do see that as a benefit. I will also share right now, there was a cost estimate that was done back in 2021. That was what was reflected in the resolution. Now that we've gotten into a little bit further in depth in engineering design, we are going through the processor and looking at what the potential construction costs would be if there is additional right-of-way acquisition that has to be done. I just do not have those numbers today, but I had promised to bring this back before this board, and I wanted to make sure that I met that deadline. I'd like to thank Michael and his team because they really kept us on track and on target so that we could present, so thank you for that opportunity. But as we move forward and we get more honed in on whether we're going to go over or under, I will be bringing that back before this board.
Well, the only other question I'll have, you say it is going to reduce congestion on the interstate, but you're adding 8,500 new jobs, so a lot more people.
Yes, sir. Well, that's one of the things we're really excited about Oracle's approach is that they are looking to build some residency right there on campus so that a lot of their folks will actually live on campus, live, work, and play on campus. And then they're also driving that pedestrian connection. You know, they're building the bridge that's going to connect to River North and then over to Germantown so that folks can make a different choice than getting in a car. And also they're really focused as well on that spine and connection to Dickerson so that their employees have a choice of using transit as an option. And those are really the folks that they're finding that they're attracting, that younger generation that's really keyed into using another mode other than a car. So we're very excited about this opportunity, and we feel like, yes, we know cars are be added through this addition, but they're really driving the other mode options versus a single occupied car. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. Good questions and comments. Anyone else? We look forward to you coming back and updating us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Sean, you got anything you want to add?
Not on that project, but there is one more project that we would like to touch on as well. This was the other one that I mentioned about the regionally significant project being the Northeast Corridor. You've seen multiple phases of this project considered as part of the Regional Transportation Plan, as well as recent TIP amendments. So you're familiar with, I think, a lot of the Northeast Vietnam Veterans Parkway discussions of this existing project is contained within our Regional Transportation Plan. our Transportation Improvement Program. It's also referenced in the Improve Act. And although there's been multiple phases that have come before you, this project was initially intended to be designed with transit managed lanes through previous regional transportation plan updates. The focus of that element being incorporated as a more effective project element to address traffic congestion than just standard general purpose lanes. And as this project has kind of gone through the planning process, the TDOT is no longer including those elements of the transit managed lanes as part of the initial phases that are moving forward into implementation. FHWA had pointed this out in our recent amendment submission to include this project into the TIP. And so an amendment would be needed to amend the regional transportation plan in order to accommodate the design change as these projects, in order for these projects to move forward in our Transportation Improvement Program.
Any questions for Sean? You say they're not including any transit managed lanes. If they was to include them, we'd have to have an amendment. Is that right?
Yeah, so the initial design of the transit managed lanes is currently being, transit managed lanes could be included, or was intended to be included, but now general purpose lanes are being proposed as part of the project scope. And given that scope change, the amendment triggers an amendment to our regional transportation plan so that there's consistency between the long-range document and our implementation program.
Mayor Moore.
Well, I've got a question to try to understand the process. I mean, we went through our process and determined that the managed lanes were an important component. How has TDOT communicated with us as far as these changes that now require us to go back and amend our plan? I mean, have we had communication with TDOT? Is TDOT here to explain how this happened and why, since we sent it to them?
Yeah, I think I can turn it over to TDOT. I think I'd just say that there's been some kind of informal coordination where we've heard about some of the design concepts that are being proposed or changed, but haven't accessed any of the planning reports or design documents. Jonathan, do you want to add to that?
Oh. So just kind of generically speaking to your point, so this, of course, was an Improve Act project that's been around for even longer than the Improve Act. When TDOT initially used the term transit managed lanes, TDOT did not have any clue what that meant. And I say that because it wasn't studied. The idea was to create a lane that was specifically for transit. Once the planning process has gone on for the last 4 years at least, the cost of this project has greatly increased. This is a substantial investment. So the idea Vietnam veterans will always have a transit component. However, there will not be a dedicated lane just for transit on the corridor. This is I don't know the exact cost estimates, but we're talking over $100 million project, $200 million project when it's finished. Well, yeah. I've seen the $400 million estimate as well. So this was one of the measures. Again, it was an exploratory. What does transit managed lanes look like? That's not something that TDOT has historically done. So just for this specific project, again, and TDOT's still working with WEGO and the NPO to include transit. Transit would be a large aspect of this project. There just won't be a dedicated lane just for transit. Does that help at all? Is there anything else you want to add?
Sean, the map that you're showing up there on the screen there is not for the Improve Act project that was from I-65 to near Saundersville Road. That's an option that was considered in the general fund transfer project that basically completes the control access corridor between Greenlee Boulevard and State Route 109. So and I'll add that the planning document for the Improve Act project includes it recommends 3 general purpose lanes and a bus on shoulder, and then also a future conversion. It widens the inside lane to allow for future, like, is it managed lane or express lane, or if that's converted. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same project here, because what we're showing up here is for the general fund transfer project that came on, that was part of the budget last year.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And this is, if there's multiple phases of this project, this is kind of the further out phase continuing beyond Saundersville Road, as you mentioned, through the funded through the general appropriation. I would also mention that regardless of the scope of this, the reference in our regional transportation plan, I think, still references transit managed lanes all the way to State Route 109, and so.
And the Tennessee Code.
Yeah, and the Tennessee Code, and so I think that's where this would need to be rectified to ensure there's consistency between what's being discussed as a proposed design and what we have in our regional plan.
Okay, Mayor Brown.
Yeah, I think we're feeling very confused about this because I think this is specific to that connector, and it is not supposed to have the technology, or I call them technology lanes, the transit lanes. But it's our understanding, Sumner County, that the rest of the project does still have those lanes, a bit like you described. I mean, I think we all kind of feel like that's to be determined what that might be, but this is specific to that area, and I don't know how it went in with the one.
Yeah, we'll acknowledge this map should have been showing phase 1 from I-65 up to the 109 bypass. But the projects are being coupled together, though, because of the request to amend the TIP to include both phases, both the general fund transfer dollars to extend, as well as to pursue the construction of the general purpose widening of the net corridor. So the feedback that we've gotten is that the TIP amendment that we submitted to Federal Highway was inconsistent with the description of the project and the plan. So we're giving the board a heads up that we may be bringing an amendment to you all for action at a later date that would rescope the project's description and the regional transportation.
Well, I understand the rescope because the addition of that connector that came from the governor's budget, but I don't understand the rescope based on the initial piece of it, because we've been consistent for years on what that understanding was as far as the whole, the rest of the corridor to that point is.
It may be helpful. I know we've requested a few times the planning reports that were prepared. We haven't been provided those documents, and all the information that we've gotten up to this point does not include any managed lanes. There is the potential for bus on shoulder, but what we've been told is that this would be a general purpose lane widening. And staff isn't taking a position on what it ought to be. We're just communicating to you that there seems to be some inconsistency between the plan and the Improve Act and the project that is being scoped through the design process.
And maybe that's something that we need to discuss long term, because I truly believe that, considering where we are at this point in the world, that what a managed lane or a transit lane may look like has to be somewhat nimble, because we don't quite know what that might be. And so I just am concerned about this being you're feeling like it was misrepresented before. I feel like it's going to be misrepresented again, and I'm not. But anyway, you say this is a heads up for what might happen in the future, so we have room to figure it out.
Yes, ma'am. I think the intent here is to get the documents aligned, not to determine, specifically what a managed lane might look like at this point. And projects change, for a lot of reasons. TDOT's pointing out, one of the significant reasons is the lack of funding availability to do what was initially envisioned. So I think we just want to make sure the board is aware of what's happening with this project, so that if you see a plan amendment proposed to the body in the future, that you understand where it came from.
Thank you, Michael. Got a I see some hands up. Go ahead, Ms. Dana.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Could we perhaps ask if TDOT could come back and kind of do a presentation of what's being proposed so we understand and there's a little bit more clarity and there's not the confusion? Would that be okay? Because I think that would be very helpful in understanding. I do feel, I'm very passionate about transit lanes. I think everybody in the room knows that. But I really would like to understand why y'all have moved away and we've gotten to this point, and I think it would provide some clarity for everybody here. And so that if the amendment does come before the board, you're going to get support and not have it denied. Which leads me to a question. If an amendment does come to the board and we do not support it, what does that do?
Michael?
Well, I think, not to put Federal Highway in the spot, but maybe you can... Well, maybe, not to speak to hypotheticals, but if project funding is seeking obligation in the federal system and there is that inconsistency that's left out there because of the lack of the amendment being processed, perhaps you could speak to, how that may hinder the obligation process.
Members of the board, thank you. So there would be no obligation because we would not be able to authorize the project because there is an inconsistency in the plan. So, based on what we're hearing, I would recommend that we figure out what's going on, understand what's happening with the project, and then is there an imminent obligation request? Then I don't think if it's not going to delay funding, I would recommend that maybe following up with what Diana says, a presentation to understand what's being proposed so y'all can make an informed decision. But we will not be able to obligate until there was, that's what I'm looking for, both projects, both plans are consistent.
Okay, anyone else got a Mayor Reed?
And I appreciate your recommendation. I think that would be beneficial to all of us. But in the meantime, I just want to make sure TDOT is going to get to staff the information that we need so that you all can provide us the information prior to their presentation, if that's possible.
Yeah, and I will add, Sean, I didn't know that TDOT still has not shared the planning report with you all. So I think that's step one. So.
Say that again, just in case someone didn't.
Yeah, I was just stating to Sean, I did not know that TDOT had still not shared the planning report with the NPO. So I want to make sure that that's the first step, that staff can review what's been done. I believe that started in 2018, late 2018, the planning report. And it did meet a lot of hiccups over the pandemic, but that is, even though the plan is not finalized as far as decision making, that is definitely the first step. And then thank you for your comment. I do think that TDOT needs to come and share a little bit more details. But again, it's still very early. There's no ask right now of anything. Again, as to back up what Michael is saying, just for transparency, that's why the asking for the amendment here to make sure that everything's aligned. So I'll start with that, Sean. I'll make sure you get the planning report.
So, Michael or Sean, I guess my question, I think this came up at the TCC. And so what I understood at that time, and I may just not have been listening well enough or something, was that we were looking at, basically TDOT had come with this extension, right? They're taking it up to 109. That didn't contain transit managed lanes, and so that was the point of contention. That needed to be rectified. But it sounds like to me what's being discussed now is the whole project's going to be looked at again. Is that what we're saying essentially, that we're going to go from I-65 all the way to 109 now and look at the whole project again?
I think the RTP generally recognizes the extension up to the 109 bypass. There is a question of is that part of the physically constrained portion of the RTP or not that needs to be answered, and that by itself could also be a trigger for a plan amendment. But I think the bigger impetus for the plan amendment is to ensure the consistency in the scope of work that would be funded in part with federal funds.
So until there is a consistency between the plans, we wouldn't be able to authorize the project. But if the project's not, as I mentioned before, if it's not imminently looking to go in the next letting, there's time, right? So we just need to make sure that the right project, scoped properly, is in both plans as y'all want it to be in there, and then we can talk about authorizations.
And just one more thing to add there, as a lot of you know, as our commissioner shared at the last meeting, about the ask for the choice lanes. We don't know if this is a corridor that's going to be a candidate for choice lanes, should those be approved. So there are a lot of uncertainties right now, so that's why there is no final ask. We just don't know what that looks like. So hopefully in the next few months we'll get a little bit more clarity on that. But just wanted to add that this is a fluid project. It's not completely changing, but there are alterations that are going to be needed on a project of any scope, but especially one of this magnitude. So thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Listen, just cause it's the Ides of March doesn't mean we're going to stab the messengers, okay? All right, thank y'all. Sean, you got anything you want to add on that?
I'll just apologize to Josh for presenting the material at CCC because it wasn't very clear.
Okay, we'll move to item B, priorities for transportation planning work program. Back to Sean again. I'm going to stay with you, Sean.
I'm actually going to let Daniel take this one.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Mayor. So the transportation planning work program, this is just an informational item. We won't adopt this program until July. But it's a federally required document that identifies federally funded regional transportation planning activities or studies that are being carried out in the region. There's about $7 million in planning activities, as well as about $1 million in membership dues that are federally required for a match. It's required to keep local governments, transit agencies, and TDOT eligible for federal funding for actual project implementation. This is just a diagram that shows all the elements that go into developing the transportation planning work program. So member input, planning emphasis areas laid out by Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration, as well as identified needs from the plan and regional priorities that this board decides on. These are the most up-to-date federal emphasis areas that Federal Highway and FTA have laid out. They include tackling the climate crisis, equity and justice in transportation planning, complete streets, public involvement, the straw net, as we discussed earlier, Federal Land Management Agency coordination, planning environmental linkages, as well as data and transportation planning. And then some of the programs that Federal Highway has introduced to help accomplish these emphasis areas and focus within the work program are the carbon reduction program, as well as the Protect program, and then as you all have seen, presentations on the electric vehicle infrastructure, as well as the work that TDOT is working on. So we sent a survey out to both this board as well as the Transportation Coordinating Committee. And these were some of the priorities that we heard from you all on what to focus on within the work program, as well as suggestions on what staff can carry out throughout this 2-year work program. So we heard that there's an important focus on safety, congestion, as well as funding strategies for projects. Also broader considerations for addressing worsening affordability issues due to inflation and other reasons that projects are becoming more expensive, as well as streamlining project delivery, some through the work of the Project Delivery Task Force. We also heard that the board as well as the TCC wants to explore opportunities for implementing the South Corridor study, some of those recommendations, and actually implementing them, as well as expanding technical assistance provided to local governments for planning and grant application administration for various grant opportunities through Federal Highway or through TDOT. These are some of the ongoing as well as upcoming planning activities. So from the GNRC level, the Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan update, the Regional Growth Management Study, as well as big data acquisition. From TDOT, the carbon reduction strategy, as well as the Tennessee Resilience Improvement Plan, and then on the local government level, several communities are updating their major thoroughfare plan updates, as well as comprehensive plan. And then from Metro Nashville, a traffic impact study guidelines update, a multimodal master plan, as well as a transit-oriented development framework. And then from transit, several WEGO studies, including the WEGO Star Future Direction Study, N-Motion Update, Murfreesboro Pike Corridor High Capacity Study, and then from Franklin Transit, a Zero-Emission Bus Fleet Transition Study. We'll be sending out a reminder to take the survey for those who haven't taken it to this board in an email, but again, this is just an informational item, and we won't be adopting this work program until July. And I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Daniel? I think you're good, Daniel. Hey, thank you. Okay, we'll move to item C, member orientation. I think I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to keep my part of this relatively short. I just wanted to say a few things here at the beginning. This is really, each year we try to bring a refresher on the NPO program, remind you of its significance and the roles and responsibilities that are involved in meeting all the federal planning requirements. I'm going to start here by giving you the sort of the staffing and administration context for the NPO. GNRC, which is an economic development district created by the Tennessee Development District Act of 1965, and I'll talk a little bit more about our scope of services as an organization here in a minute. But we have the distinct honor of staffing the Transportation Policy Board and providing the professional planning services to carry out the required planning activities and in conjunction with consultants, the required planning studies to help inform the decision-making that's made by this body. GNRC is a public agency, as I mentioned, created by state law. It's actually owned and operated by the city and county government that represents across 13 counties in Middle Tennessee. We are staffed by 80 professionals, the planners that you see here at these meetings, as well as economic and community development professionals, social workers, small business lending analysts, and a range of other professions that support our programming. Our programming is largely based on not only the needs of the region, but the role that we play in helping convene local elected officials and practitioners across Middle Tennessee to drive federal investment in a range of infrastructure projects, community development projects, and social services. And so our history as an organization is tied very closely to the history of the NPO program as well. I mentioned we were created in the 1960s. This is a time when Congress was delegating the decision-making authority for how federal investments were going to be spent in infrastructure and social services to local communities. And this was also during the era of civil rights and some of the negative fallout of the way federal investments were being used by states across America really led to a heightened awareness about the need to include local communities in the decision-making process. So the NPO program is one of those things that was born out of that era, but also the role we play in coordinating economic development investments that are made by the federal government, as well as the federal investments that are made into aging and disability services. And so if you go to the next slide, we hold a host of designations at the GNRC level. They're really a recognition by the federal and state government that we're the primary forum for convening local elected officials and local practitioners to work together cooperatively to prioritize federal dollars and, to some extent, by extension, state dollars into really important infrastructure and social services across Middle Tennessee. And so the staff to the Transportation Policy Board, again, is provided by the Greater Nashville Regional Council. But one thing that's really important to understand is that the council as a public agency represents a slightly different geography than the geography represented by the Transportation Policy Board, which includes 6 of the 13 counties within the GNRC footprint plus Murray County. The geography of the NPO is largely driven by the commute shed and the relationships that exist across the transportation system here in Middle Tennessee. If you go to the next slide, you can see a look at the geographies for all the transportation planning areas across the state of Tennessee. There are 11 NPOs, including the Nashville Area NPO, which this board is the policy board for. But within our GNRC footprint, there's the Clarksville Urbanized Area NPO, and then there are 2 rural planning organizations, the Middle Tennessee RPO and the Dale Hollow RPO that Trousdale County participates in. And collectively, these regional transportation planning organizations are convening the local elected officials across the state of Tennessee to be an interface with TDOT as it relates to the development of the three-year work program that they present to the legislature, as well as the state transportation improvement program that will program the federal funds that are being used across the state of Tennessee. The geography of the Nashville area MPO, or the Metropolitan Planning Area, has also evolved over time. And if we can go to the next slide, you can see how back in the late 60s, early 70s, the footprint of the MPO program was wholly within Davidson County. And you can see it is expanded over time as the urban footprint has also expanded across the Nashville Metropolitan Planning Area. So with that background, I'm going to turn it over to Sean to give you a surface level overview of roles and responsibilities, including the core products and their significance. But I also want to make sure you see this as a quick refresher and a plug for some additional resources that we'll be following up with you about. Those of you who are interested in the history of MPO planning, which I think is really significant to why we exist today, that'll be the first video that we released in a series of videos that help you have access to constant information about why it is that you come together as a board to direct these investments into transportation.
Thank you, Michael. So you all serve on the Transportation Policy Board, and this is our primary forum for collaboration. We're lucky enough to get a lot of local elected officials to our meetings every other month, as well as TDOT, public transit operators, and other federal agencies as well. And I think you all are supported by our Transportation Coordinating Committee that typically meets on the first Wednesday of each month. That's more made up of a lot of the staff of planners and engineers from the local governments, as well as state, federal agencies, and our local governments. But they kind of inform and serve as kind of our lead advisory committee to inform a lot of the actions that you take. They work with staff pretty closely on not only flushing out the needs of the region and going through a lot of the data that kind of formulate the recommendations that you all see, but they also are kind of the boots on the ground of implementing a lot of this work at the community level. In addition to the Transportation Coordinating Committee, we have a number of other standing committees, Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee that's focused on addressing and improving bicycle and pedestrian conditions across the region. We also have a number of task forces that we've and other standing committees such as Project Delivery that's focused on issues that come about and elevate to a level of importance that we dedicate attention to. Just some of the member responsibilities. I know there's a lot of them, but working cooperatively across boundaries is a key one. You all are part of the same region, and I think it was said earlier that what's good for one community is often beneficial for a number of others. And oftentimes you have to make the tough decisions, prioritizing transportation needs. There's a lot of them, and the list seems to continue to grow as we continue to add people to our region. But we do have known constraints, particularly fiscal constraints being a common one where we have to prioritize between our priorities to implement those moving forward. Being willing to identify strategies and resources to overcome some of the challenges and obstacles that we have within our region. Thinking long term and considering future generations is another responsibility, given that our plans look out 20 plus years. And then thinking comprehensively, GNRC obviously has a vast portfolio, and transportation touches on a lot of different issues and topics, from housing to land use, the environment, social services, among others. And also just to continue to track and monitor progress to make sure that we're headed in the right direction, and if we need to change course, that we're willing to do that. Some of the staff responsibilities, obviously facilitating and convening this, our meetings that we are typically meeting with either monthly or every other month. And then being kind of a clearinghouse of data and resources for you all to utilize and leverage, even on some of your local planning products, given our the amount of data that we're gathering and analyzing throughout the region to identify kind of existing conditions and emerging issues. Obviously, prioritizing the region's transportation needs over the long term through our long-range plan, and then also programming those dollars in the short term through our transportation improvement program. Maintaining our work program, as Daniel talked about, our transportation planning work program, to continue to refresh and identify the needs that are changing within our region and how we're going to go about addressing those. And then just being a partner and a stakeholder, working with not only folks at the local level, but also the state level, regional transit agencies as well, to coordinate a lot of the work that's going on. I know we didn't even cover all of the local planning activities that are going on, but I think that identifies the opportunities that there are to coordinate and leverage a lot of those efforts that are going on across levels of government. Kind of just touched on the 3 core products, but you'll know that our recent regional transportation plan was updated in February 2021, and looks out long term, out to 2045. That's where we are establishing our vision and goals for the region, and also identifying those priorities for investment over the next 25 years. Our transportation improvement program is another document that we've recently updated. Adopted in November 2022, and that is a 4-year funding program of kind of the implementation arm of our regional transportation plan, of the projects that we're going to be implementing over the different phases of work in the next 4 years. And then our transportation planning work program is a 2-year document and captures a lot of those planning activities, not only that GNRC is leading, but also how it is leveraging and coordinated with those other efforts conducted by you all at the local level. And kind of just the responsibilities and members' input into those core products. It's a little bit repetitive, but really identifying those transportation needs over the long term, prioritizing those strategies that are going to get us there in order to address those objectives. When it comes to the TIP, I think it's a little bit more hands-on of the projects that you guys are carrying out through the TDOT local program process, and advancing those projects through the development process and as closely as we can to the programming that we've identified through the TIP. And then communicating with staff, particularly Anna, on project updates and any requests for changes to scope or additional funding needs as projects move through the pipeline, and maybe have some surprises when it comes to additional funding needs or scope changes. And then lastly, through our work program is just sharing your local efforts or sub-regional efforts that are going on within your community or county, and then identifying those regional priorities that are beneficial to multiple communities and members across the region to address in the coming planning studies. I think just some of the expectations. Some of this is probably repetitive, but when it comes to the TIP, this is some of the detailed project updates that we're looking for is any changes to project scope, cost, schedule, making sure that you're providing the local match that's necessary in order to leverage those federal funds, and obligating that funding on a timely basis, so that the money that we're programming through the TIP is also being obligated in a timely manner. For staff, we're conducting the process and making sure that it's fair, transparent, and predictable. We also have, when it comes to the TIP, our programming policies to try and monitor that obligation of federal funding, and it often tied to obligating the money as it's been programmed within the TIP, so that it's we're getting that money spent. And then just processing those amendments, as we know it's a very dynamic document. Projects change on a daily basis, and so just keeping us up to speed on that. The last thing for our orientation that I want to touch on, and this is another one that, as Michael mentioned, requires more time and attention, and so probably another part of the future video series is touching on the tools and resources that are available. Max and his team do a great job of not only gathering and analyzing the data, but then making it available to you all through a number of dashboards and applications on our website and through our data portal that you can access at gnrc.org. Just to give you a sense of some of the resources that are available, it spans transportation facilities, bridges, sidewalks, greenways. We've also got information on demographics and equity through not only census data, but some of the vulnerable population and analysis that we've done to identify particular areas that are above average when it comes to low income or carless households. And then system performance, which is a continual building area that as we get more and more information that tends to be in real time now from traffic conditions on the roadway, we're able to answer questions that you have about when congestion is on a particular corridor by day of the week or time of day. And so a lot of transformation in that world, particularly since the pandemic. And then environmental, we've got a number of data layers related to floodplains and other environmentally sensitive areas that you can utilize to kind of screen projects before you scope it out and go through the NEPA process. We've got growth and development trends, and then you've heard us present a lot on a lot of the crash data and safety analysis that we've done across the region. So that's all available and information that we will gladly share and can utilize to support your local planning efforts. And then lastly, just a couple of interactive tools. We touched on one of these today as Anna was going through the TIP amendments. Daniel had the TIP application interactive database up, and so you can not only see your projects, but also see the proposed amendments that are under consideration. As I mentioned, this includes resources to some of the dashboards that you can access at gnrc.org/dashboards. And so that's all I have, but just to plug, we'll have more information to share, likely through a future video series. Michael touched on the history of transportation is rich, and it spans 50 plus years, and so there's been a lot of evolution not only in the region of as we've grown and developed, but also the MPO program has expanded in terms of the responsibilities that have been passed down from transportation bills at the federal level to just the expansion of staff capability and resources. And so be on the lookout for that, and I think you'll enjoy some of the content, and it'll provide, I think, some better context to where we are now and what we're responsible for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Good job. All right, Chair recognizes. Oh, you ready for your report?
No, sir, I'd like to make a comment on
Okay, go ahead,
previous
ma'am.
presentation. Thank you. I just want to make sure it's clear, because not all the slides that we were shown were in the packet, so some of them overlapped, but some of them did not. And I want to make it clear, the MPO and the GNRC are not the same. There is a slide in your packet that shows the geography, where they overlap and where they don't. And so some of the slides that I saw presented to the board maybe weren't as clear as we would have liked it to be. So the MPO is this board, all right? So we recognize, the federal government recognizes, state government recognizes MPO as this board, right? GNRC provides staff to you as the MPO, and that's the relationship between GNRC and the MPO as far as we're concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And just to clarify, what's in the packet is the Transportation Planning Prospectus document. It does look like slides, and we may have borrowed some of them as slides, but that's the full Transportation Planning Prospectus. Also another federal requirement in terms of what we're required to produce to explain how transportation planning is carried out across Middle Tennessee. And for anybody who's interested in the relationship that exists between the Transportation Policy Board and the Greater Nashville Regional Council, we have a formal agreement between this body and the governing body of the Regional Council that's available for download at gnrc.org/NPO, along with TPV bylaws, information about program dues, and the prospectus that's included in the packet.
But this board is the MPO.
Okay. Thank you, Pam. Thanks, Michael and Sean, for the work y'all do in GNRC, and hey, a lot of thanks to y'all staff for what all you do for us. We'll move on to our information regular reports, and the chair recognizes the Federal Administrator, Pam Cordenbrough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. A couple of things I wanted to bring to your attention. We have a lot of activities that are going on in our discretionary grants through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So a couple of things. EV charging minimum standards, the final rule was published at the end of February. It becomes effective the end of March. So it establishes minimum standards for all FHWA-funded EV chargers. So I know there's actually a meeting that's happening right now on EVs, the TEVI, which is the Tennessee EV. Is it? Help me out, Jonathan. It's what is it? TEVI is Tennessee Initiative. Is I the initiative? Electric Vehicle Initiative. So TEVI is the Tennessee version of what's happening on the federal level. So I'll ask y'all to talk with TDOT as a representative of that group. But we're looking at setting minimum standards nationwide. So discretionary grants program for charging and fueling infrastructure was the NOFO, the Notice of Proposed Funding, was released on March 14th. Right. $700 million is available to deploy EV charging infrastructure and other alternative fuel infrastructure projects in urban and rural communities. There's grants as well as for corridors and grants for community charging. So I would recommend, if y'all are interested in those programs, that you take a look at the NOFO, the proposed funding, and look at the criteria that's listed there, because that'll help you understand how those grants will be judged and selected. The applications are due May 30th for that. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was the Safe Streets and Roads for All, the SS4A program. Wanted to congratulate Murray County and the town of Smyrna for having been selected to get one of the 12 action plan grants that were awarded to Tennessee. So $800 million in grant awards were announced last month, including the ones for Murray County and Smyrna. So the FY23 Notice of Proposed Funding for that is going to open in April for the second round. So if you were not able to put in, because it kind of came on all of a sudden, you have an opportunity to take a look at either a planning grant or an implementation grant. If you have questions on what that means and you're interested in applying, please give us a call, and we're happy to answer any questions on that. Any questions for me?
Any questions for Pam?
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you for that report. Okay, we're going to move on to our TDEC report. I think we're going to recognize Jim Preston. Elliot?
I'm going to go by Jonathan.
You're going to go for Jonathan today?
Yeah.
I'm going to get on Sean then. Okay, thank you.
No, the only thing I wanted to add is I mentioned this a couple weeks ago at the TCC meeting. We have something called a transportation planning grant that we've offered for the last 8 years. Last 2 years it's been offered to, or extended to the MPO area. This year, 4 of your communities, 3 in Williamson County, 1 in Sumner County, have applied for that grant and received it. If any of you are interested in that, I encourage you to speak with your TCC representatives. We have almost $2 million available this year for planning studies, and would love to have a lot of participation from this MPO. So again, I just want to reiterate what was said earlier. I don't know if a lot of you speak to your TCC members, the Technical Coordinating Committee, but there's a lot of great conversation that goes on in those meetings. I'm one of a handful of people at this table. I think there's 3 of us that attend both of those meetings, both the TPB and the TCC. I would strongly encourage you, if you do not already, to speak with that staff before these meetings, because we share a lot of good stuff. We have a lot of good conversation, and some of those meetings go fairly long. So it's a good thing. So again, the planning grant TPG I encourage you all to apply, and that will be coming at the end of this month. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Any questions for Jonathan? Okay, since we're probably running short of time on my staff report, my report is going to be very short. First, I want to thank the staff for all the work they do. As you know by our meetings here, that it's pretty complicated. And unless you was living under a bowl, we had that storm the other day. And I want to say something about the county highway departments. Usually my phone rings off the wall about chug holes and trees down and everything. But these highway departments that do not depend on property tax, they strictly run by the fuel tax, that they did a great job. And I think all us mayors and your city road departments or whatever, your utilities, we need to give them a pat on the back because, I've never seen the wind blow that long and that hard. And they really got out and done the job because my phone didn't all ring, and I appreciate it. With that, I think I might be looking for one more motion. No, I got to do a staff report. Sean, you're back on again.
I'll just point out in the packet we identified some announcements for some of the upcoming grant opportunities. We'll add to this list in the follow-up email so that you have a lot of these resources and links, because I know that there's a lot of different grant opportunities and it's hard to keep track of all of them that are coming down the pipeline. Also, I wanted to mention that at the February GNRC meeting, we had presented the estimates for not only GNRC membership dues, but also the MPO program dues. And so you can find that information on the website at the link, gnrc.org/budget. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that. And then lastly, just some of the upcoming meetings. Next time we'll meet will be in May and then again in July. But we also will be, the regional council body will be meeting next month to talk about the comprehensive economic development strategy and kick off that document that we update annually. And then we will likely be bringing back amendments for the regional transportation plan and the TIP in May. We also have a couple of performance measure targets that are in need of an update that we will be bringing to you, and then also give you an update, likely a draft transportation planning work program at that point. And then June, we're back to the regional council body. They'll be meeting at the downtown library, not here that month, and discussion of or adopting the annual budget, electing officers, and announcing appointments to the boards and committees. And then in July, as we had mentioned, we'll have TIP amendments again, and then targeting our adoption of the transportation planning work program at that meeting. And that's all I have.
Okay, anybody got any questions for Sean? Mayor Anderson, you haven't made a motion today. Not you, Rogers, the other one. Would you like to make our motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
So be.
Yeah.